You think you're so smart, don't you, boy? Dr. Albright sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Let's see how smart you are when you're faced with a real challenge. Not your little street numbers. This is my classroom. He slammed a complex algebraic equation onto the projector, the numbers a chaotic dance of symbols and variables. It was clearly beyond the scope of anything taught in their advanced calculus class. An impossible problem. A cruel, public test. Elijah felt a familiar sting, but his face remained a mask of calm. He simply looked at the board, then at Dr. Albright, his eyes betraying nothing. He took the chalk extended to him, his fingers precise. He did not speak. He would not give Albright the satisfaction. This was not the first time. Not by a long shot. Elijah Vance was a quiet storm. He sat in the back of Dr. Albright's advanced calculus class, a scholarship student in a sea of privilege. Most of his classmates were too intimidated by Albright to even notice the subtle, daily barbs, the dismissive hand gestures, the way Albright always seemed to forget Elijah's name, even after months. But Elijah noticed. He documented. He was not just a student. He was a prodigy, a mathematical savant who had, by age 16, already published 2 peer-reviewed papers under a pseudonym in obscure, highly technical journals. He was here at Northwood Academy on a full scholarship, not just for his intellect, but as part of a highly selective outreach program. His father, a renowned astrophysicist, had insisted on Northwood for its rigorous academic reputation, despite the subtle warnings about its traditional faculty. Elijah had promised his father he would endure. He would graduate. He would change things. Dr. Albright, however, saw only a black boy from a disadvantaged neighborhood. A quota. An interloper. Albright's sneering comments about affirmative action and lowered standards were constant, thinly veiled insults aimed squarely at Elijah. Across the room, Sarah Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was a top student, always had been. Her father was on the school board. She admired Elijah's quiet brilliance, the way he effortlessly grasped concepts that left even her struggling. She had seen Albright's behavior for weeks, the way he subtly undermined Elijah, the way he ignored his raised hand but called on less capable students. It was wrong. She knew it was wrong, but she was afraid to speak up. Albright was a legend at Northwood, a tenured professor with powerful connections. Her own academic future felt tied to his approval. Albright's voice cut through the silence. Well, keck out your tongue, Vance. Or is this just a little too advanced for you? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. A few students nervously tittered. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Elijah turned to the board, his back to the class. He tapped the chalk against the complex equation. His mind was a whirlwind of numbers, but his movements were deliberate, almost serene. He wasn't just looking at the problem. He was dissecting Albright's intent. This was not a test of knowledge. It was an act of aggression. He began to write. Not the answer, not yet. He started by rewriting the problem, simplifying the notation, breaking it down into smaller, more manageable components. His handwriting was neat, precise. He moved with an economical grace, each stroke of chalk purposeful. Albright watched, a smug smile playing on his lips. Taking your time, I see. Perhaps you need a simpler version? We can always go back to basic arithmetic if this is too much. Elijah ignored him. He was in his element now, the numbers a language he understood better than words. He felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the intellectual puzzle unfolding before him. He moved from simplification to identifying the core principles, the underlying theorems. He worked through a series of transformations, each step logical, elegant. Sarah watched, mesmerized. She recognized some of the initial steps, but then Elijah veered into territory far beyond their curriculum. He was using techniques she'd only read about in advanced textbooks, methods that required an intuitive grasp of mathematics, not just rote memorization. This was pure genius. Albright's smile began to falter. He had expected fumbling, confusion, perhaps even tears. Instead, Elijah was working with a confidence that was unnerving. The equations on the board grew longer, more intricate, but each line was a clear progression towards a solution. What exactly are you doing, Vance? Albright's tone was sharper now, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. You're just making it more complicated. Elijah paused, his chalk hovering over the board. He turned, facing Albright directly for the first time since the problem was presented. His voice was calm, clinical. I am demonstrating the equivalence of the initial problem to a known class of boundary value problems in nonlinear partial differential equations, Dr. Albright. Specifically, those involving a non-standard Green's function approach for a variable coefficient operator. Silence. The entire class stared. Albright's jaw went slack. He stammered, "A Green's function? That's not what I asked for." Elijah raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his eyes. "You presented a problem, doctor. I am solving it. My method is demonstrably more efficient and robust for this particular class of integral transforms." He turned back to the board. He began to write again, faster now, his chalk flying across the slate. He moved from theoretical framework to specific calculations, filling the board with dense, elegant mathematics. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was giving a masterclass. He was exposing Albright's amateurish attempt at a challenge, revealing the deeper, more complex world of mathematics that Albright himself only superficially understood. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just math anymore. This was a battle, and Elijah was winning. She pulled out her phone, discreetly, and began recording. She knew it was a risk, but she couldn't not do it. This needed to be seen. Albright's face was turning an unhealthy shade of purple. He couldn't follow the calculations anymore. He couldn't even pretend to. He was out of his depth. This wasn't just a student. This was something else entirely. Elijah wrote the final line, a single, elegant solution. He circled it with a flourish. He stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to face the stunned class. "The solution, Dr. Albright," Elijah said, his voice quiet but resonant. "And an alternative derivation using a novel application of the Laplace-Stieltjes transform, which I believe you'll find more amenable to numerical approximation." Albright stood frozen, staring at the board, then at Elijah. His carefully constructed world of intellectual superiority was crumbling around him. The impossible problem, designed to humiliate, had become his own undoing. The bell rang, loud and jarring, breaking the spell. Students began to pack their bags, whispering. Sarah stopped recording, her heart pounding. She had it. All of it. Albright finally found his voice, a choked, desperate sound. "Vance, you cheated. You must have seen this problem before." Elijah merely shook his head. "No, doctor. I merely applied the principles you claim to teach. Perhaps, in future, you might consider the breadth of knowledge available, rather than assuming its limits." He gathered his books, his expression unreadable, and walked out of the classroom, leaving Albright alone with the impossible solution on the board and the dawning horror of his own incompetence. The conflict moved swiftly to Albright's perceived territory. The dean's office. Dr. Albright, still seething from the classroom humiliation, had lodged an official complaint. He accused Elijah of insubordination, using unauthorized methods, and attempting to discredit a faculty member. Dean Thompson, a portly, perpetually flustered man, sat behind his large mahogany desk. Albright paced, red-faced, recounting his version of events, painting Elijah as an arrogant, disrespectful student. "He deliberately tried to make a fool of me, Dean, in front of the entire class, using some obscure, theoretical nonsense." Albright ranted. "This is precisely what happens when we lower our standards for certain individuals." Elijah sat calmly in a visitor's chair, his hands clasped, listening. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. "Dr. Albright, please calm down," Dean Thompson said, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "Elijah, do you have anything to say about these accusations?" Elijah looked directly at Albright, then at the dean. "I solved the problem presented to me, Dean Thompson. The method I used is mathematically sound and, as I explained to Dr. Albright, more efficient for that class of problem. I did not insult him. I merely answered his challenge." "Nonsense," Albright roared. "It was an impossible problem. No student could solve it on the fly, not even a graduate student." Just then, the door opened, and Sarah Jenkins walked in, her face determined. She held her phone in her hand. "Excuse me, Dean Thompson. I believe I have some relevant information regarding this matter." Albright blanched. "Miss Jenkins, what are you doing here?" Sarah ignored him. She looked at Elijah, a silent promise in her eyes. "I recorded the entire incident, Dean. Dr. Albright's exact words. Elijah's solution. Everything. She held up her phone. And I can attest that Elijah did not use any unauthorized materials. He solved it in real time, on the board. Dean Thompson's eyes widened. A recording? Miss Jenkins, you know the Academy's policy on electronic devices in classrooms. I am aware, Dean, Sarah interrupted, her voice steady. But I felt it was necessary to document what I witnessed. Dr. Albright's behavior was unprofessional, discriminatory, and frankly, abusive. He targeted Elijah from the moment he walked into that classroom. Albright sputtered. This is an outrage. A conspiracy. I will not stand for this. Just then, another knock. A different kind of knock. Firm. Authoritative. Dean Thompson, looking even more flustered, said, Come in. The door opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed woman with sharp, intelligent eyes entered. She was followed by a distinguished-looking gentleman in a tailored suit. Albright's face went from purple to ashen. Governor Davies. Professor Thorne. The woman, Governor Davies, gave Albright a cold, appraising look. Dr. Albright, I trust you are familiar with the distinguished Professor Alastair Thorne, head of the National Institute of Advanced Mathematics. Albright stammered. Of course, Governor. A great honor. He shot a confused, panicked glance at Elijah. Professor Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with mathematical genius, smiled warmly at Elijah. Elijah, my boy, I apologize for the intrusion, but I couldn't miss this. Your father called me. Said you might be having a minor disagreement with a faculty member. The color drained from Albright's face. Elijah's father, the renowned astrophysicist. Alastair Thorne. The pieces clicked into place, brutally. Dr. Albright, Governor Davies began, her voice calm but steel-edged. Professor Thorne and I are here today for a very specific reason. We've been tracking Elijah's progress for some time. In fact, we were quite excited when he chose Northwood Academy for his sabbatical. Sabbatical. The word hung in the air, mocking Albright's earlier assumptions. Professor Thorne stepped forward, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. Elijah Vance, as many of you may not know, is not just a student. He is the youngest recipient ever of the prestigious Fields Medal for his groundbreaking work in topological data analysis. He's also the lead author on a new theorem, the Vance-Thorne conjecture, which is currently revolutionizing quantum computing research. The entire room fell silent. Dean Thompson looked like he might faint. Sarah gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Albright swayed on his feet, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. Elijah Vance, the quiet scholarship student, was a mathematical genius whose work was reshaping scientific fields. He was not just a student. He was the student, here not to learn, but to briefly engage with a traditional academic setting before embarking on a career that would eclipse most full professors. Governor Davies continued, her gaze fixed on Albright. Elijah chose Northwood because he wanted a taste of a traditional academic environment, to experience what many young people do. He specifically requested that his identity remain confidential to avoid preferential treatment. He wanted to be treated like any other student. She paused. It seems, Dr. Albright, you took that request rather literally. Professor Thorne turned to Albright, his voice losing its warmth, becoming sharp and authoritative. That impossible problem you presented, Dr. Albright? It's a well-known variation of a problem I posed in a graduate seminar at MIT 15 years ago. A problem only a handful of mathematicians worldwide could solve in real time. Elijah solved it. And he did so with an elegance and insight that, frankly, surpasses my own original solution. He then turned to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, may I see that recording? Sarah, still reeling from the revelation, quickly handed over her phone. Professor Thorne watched the video, his expression growing increasingly grim as Albright's taunts and Elijah's calm, brilliant response unfolded. Governor Davies watched over his shoulder, her face hardening with each demeaning word from Albright. The evidence was irrefutable. Albright's prejudice, his incompetence, his cruelty, all captured. Dean Thompson finally found his voice, a squeak. Dr. Albright, this is unacceptable. Gross misconduct, discrimination, academic fraud, attempting to fail a student based on nothing but prejudice. Governor Davies looked at Albright, her eyes cold. Dr. Albright, as a member of the school board, Dean Thompson, and as governor of this state, I find your actions not only reprehensible, but a profound disservice to the values Northwood Academy claims to uphold. You have not only humiliated a brilliant young man, but have also demonstrated a blatant disregard for intellectual integrity and basic human decency. Professor Thorne added, I believe this institution has a strict policy regarding faculty behavior, especially concerning harassment and discrimination. And attempting to discredit a Fields medalist is certainly a unique form of academic misconduct. The fallout was swift and merciless. Dr. Albright was suspended immediately, effective that very hour. A formal investigation was launched, not just into his conduct with Elijah, but into all his past interactions with minority students. Sarah's recording, coupled with Elijah's quiet testimony, exposed a pattern of systemic prejudice that had festered within Northwood for years, often ignored or dismissed by previous administrations. Within days, the investigation widened. Several former students, emboldened by the public revelation, came forward with their own stories of Albright's discriminatory behavior. Dean Thompson, facing immense pressure from the governor and the school board, was forced to accept a demotion, his failure to address Albright's known prejudices coming to light. A new, more proactive dean was appointed, committed to diversity and accountability. Albright's tenure was revoked. He was stripped of his professorship, his academic reputation in tatters. The story made national headlines. Fields medalist targeted by racist professor, his career, built on a foundation of unearned privilege and prejudice, collapsed entirely. He faced not just professional ruin, but social ostracization. For Elijah, the change was profound. He was no longer the quiet scholarship student. He was publicly acknowledged for the genius he was. Northwood Academy, desperate to salvage its reputation, offered him an honorary doctorate, a dedicated research wing, and an apology tour led by the new dean. Elijah politely declined the doctorate, stating he preferred to earn his degrees through the traditional path, but accepted the research wing, seeing it as an opportunity to mentor other young, marginalized prodigies. Sarah Jenkins was hailed as a hero. Her courage in recording and presenting the evidence earned her a full academic scholarship, an internship with Professor Thorne's Institute, and the respect of her peers and the new administration. She became a vocal advocate for ethical conduct and diversity within the academy. Months later, the Northwood Academy campus buzzed with a different energy. The portraits of old, stern-faced benefactors were still there, but now, new faces appeared. Images of diverse students, scientists, and scholars, including a prominent, smiling photo of Elijah Vance, labeled Distinguished Alumnus and Visionary. Elijah, no longer anonymous, occasionally lectured at the academy, not as a student, but as a visiting professor, sharing his insights with eager, respectful students. His research wing was a hub of innovation, attracting bright minds from around the world. The systemic change at Northwood was palpable. New faculty hires prioritized diversity and inclusion. Mandatory bias training became standard. The traditional faculty, those who had quietly enabled Albright, were either retired or re-educated. The academy, once a bastion of old-world privilege, was slowly, deliberately, transforming into a true center of academic excellence, where merit and character, not prejudice, defined its community. Elijah would often see Sarah in the halls, now a confident leader in student initiatives. They would share a knowing smile. The impossible math problem had not just exposed a racist teacher. It had begun to dismantle a system, one elegant, undeniable solution at a time. The numbers had spoken, and their truth was undeniable.